Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingasos and Fire, episode number 15. Our guest today is Gilbert Garcia. He is a graduate of Harvard University. He is the author of Reagan's Comeback, 4 weeks that in Texas that changed American politics forever. He's an award-winning reporter. And he is currently the Metro columnist for the San Antonio Express News. And he is the co-host of Puro Politics, a political podcast for the Express News. Welcome, Gilbert, to Los Libertinos.
Thank you, Carlos. It's great to be here.
So some people might know you that from the people that are hopefully subscribers, family, friends, because I know you from being a part of a local radio show, the Jack Riccardi show, when I used to get invited, and I was just a phone caller person, and somehow it was it's been a nice trip because it's just funny how things kind of go full circle sometimes. So I've always kind of liked all that stuff. But for anyone that doesn't know you, I'd like to see if you can kind of give a background to like your born, raised, your upbringing. Your education and how you kind of took a trip where you're at now. I know it's kind of but if you can kind of summarize your background there before we get into some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Well, I was born in Brownsville. I spent my first 12 years there, then moved to Edinburgh. So completely a product of the Valley. And I ended up, like you mentioned, going up to the out of state for college. And really, it grew out of the fact that, when I was a sophomore, I had a friend who was a couple of years older who went to Princeton, and I was like, you can do that. You can go outside of. It hadn't occurred to me you go outside of Texas. So there was kind of a small group of us at Edinburgh High School. We only had one high school at the time, who kind of started thinking in those terms about maybe going to different places around. And so we had one person went to MIT and one person went to Yale and this kind of stuff. So it was kind of just this group of friends, really, from Edinburgh High School. And as far as like journalism, I was thinking I'd probably end up being a lawyer. I majored in government, which I don't know. I'm not really sure how much good it's done me, because it's like I do write a lot about government, but it's not like I ever taught. A lot of people who probably major in that, there's probably maybe like an academic career or something like that. But I got interested in journalism really, and this is where I think my path is probably unusual. Is that I got interested in journalism because I was a musician. And I was really interested in music. And I thought along the way, I would read music magazines, this kind of stuff. And so I started wanting to write about it. And this, in the same way that I think a lot of sports writers are probably like frustrated jocks, they want to be close to sports because they, if they can't make it to the NBA, they would love the idea of writing about it, And so for me, it was like I loved being around music and I kind of felt like I understood the language of music. So I was really a music writer, and I mainly wrote about music and the arts, and I interviewed musicians and did all this kind of stuff. And then very slowly, and I mainly wrote for weekly newspapers. I've probably spent more of my years working for like alternative weekly newspapers, and the last 12 years or so with the Express News. But before that, it was mainly weeklies. And so that was the thing. And I kind of stumbled into writing about politics. I was interested in it, just like you are. But it wasn't something that I really thought about writing about. But then I started doing a little bit of it here and there, and then it just kind of grew, and I got a chance to come to the Express News and stuff. So I never really had any kind of plan or anything like that. And I think one thing that I like to think is that because I was a music writer initially, and I was a music fan. I mean, when I was teenager and I was reading music magazines and stuff like that, the music writing that I loved was really irreverent, and it would, even if they were writing about like musical artists that they liked, the writers would tend to like make fun of them or poke fun of them a little bit. They had a sense of humor about it, and a willingness to kind of poke fun even at people that they liked. And so I think maybe a little bit of that, I'm not sure how much, but a little of that maybe crept into some of the political writing I did, because, I just never felt like I have a lot of respect for people who get into the political arena, because it's so hard. to actually put yourself out there and run for office. It's really, really hard. But at the same time, I think, we have to have a sense of humor about it and not, even if even when it's somebody that you respect or admire, you can kind of poke fun at them a little bit here.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, and when I had reached out to you, I had kind of put the premise out that I wanted to kind of discuss your point of view on kind of the pull and tug that you get from the political right against maybe you personally on your on your writing style, or and also maybe the media class. So to carry those type of those two, personal and the media class, but and to know like whether it's warranted or if it's just politics. But I'd like to get back to that. But what I wanted to first get into, because it's like the hot stuff right now, it's all of the Afghanistan pullout, and you had a recent piece that you put out on the Express News, which I'll put a link to here in the show notes too, and I think it speaks exactly to why I wanted to talk to you, which is that every time that I've always interacted with you, I've always thought that and hey, sports metaphors are good here because I'm a sports fan and I know you're a sports fan too. So I've always thought that you have called balls and strikes the best way that you can, and sometimes there's that same pull and tug that you get from the outside. You have that inside of you too, where you want to call your own balls and strikes, your own code, I guess you would want to say. And and the piece that you wrote, you're already like kind of you're giving a perspective that most people don't like when it's team sports. When we're talking about politics, right? Everybody likes to be on their side, and you kind of you wrote a piece about kind of that both Trump and Biden might have had the best takes on as presidents of the four presidents that have reigned over the Afghanistan war. Can you kind of talk about your piece? And then also, I'd like to see if we can have this running conversation about, because I kind of have this idea, is that to me, the way that after 9/11, I knew the world was going to change. And then after COVID, I knew the world was going to change. So I kind of feel that there's these similarity and these parallels that are running together, and how maybe these two the Afghan and COVID stuff is like converging these narratives that are just really big narratives. And maybe talk about your piece and we can kind of get into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we've all seen with the press and one of the things that obviously changed in my lifetime was, just the rise of like 24-hour, news channels and stuff like that, which I think has changed the way people cover things. And because they have to fill up a lot of time, and there's a lot of people who are just on there throwing out opinions. And so what that means is that you're expected to have these people who are guests on a lot of 24-hour news channels are expected to have like these brilliant, insightful takes immediately in the heat of a moment. And so the hot take right now is, oh my God, this is a disaster, Afghanistan. This is a disaster, and Biden he's disgraced himself, and this is really awful. And I'm not coming at it from the perspective of a defender of him or anything, but I'm just looking at the situation, and I'm thinking, I think there's been pretty widespread bipartisan agreement in this country that Afghanistan, we've been there too long. I mean, when Obama took over in 2009, this is 12 years ago, polling showed, I think there was a Gallup poll that showed only 35% of the people in this country were happy about us continuing to be there. That was 12 years ago. And this is really outrageous that we've had troops there for 20 years. And none of us could have envisioned that, when this happened in 2001. So we all knew that, there was widespread agreement, this has to end. Donald Trump negotiated a deal with the Taliban, spent most of 2019 negotiating. In early 2020, they reached an agreement. We're going to pull out in May of 2021. So if he'd gotten reelected, he would have pulled out. And he actually said in April, I'm glad Biden's doing this, that he's continuing with this agreement. I wish he would it would be even a little bit earlier, a few months earlier. That's what I wanted. So there wasn't a lot of controversy about that. Ted Cruz and various other Republicans were all saying 3 or 4 months ago, Biden's doing the right thing. I'm glad he's sticking to the Trump agreement, and we've been there too long. We shouldn't be doing this nation building. That isn't good. And so I found myself thinking, well, yes, the exit is chaotic. I think that people have made the point that whenever you invade a country and your side doesn't win or the opposition does win, the end is going to be chaotic. I don't know how you're going to get out of there without some chaos. Now, should they have started evacuating people slowly over a period of weeks? I'm sure they should have. And I've heard Biden's argument for not doing that. I didn't think it made a lot of sense. But they probably should have evacuated people earlier. And when he admitted that he didn't think that the Taliban was going to just take over the country so fast, he was surprised. I thought, well, he should have access to the best intelligence. How was he surprised by this when I think you and I probably saw this coming, right? So I'm not saying that he was without fault, but nonetheless, no matter how this went down, it was going to be chaotic and it was going to be clumsy. Getting out of a country where you've been there 20 years and you've got people who are going to want to leave the country, you've got interpreters and so on. So it was going to be clumsy. So I'm thinking, what is the big objection? People had already agreed that it was time to get out. It was long past time to get out. And we knew that getting out meant the Taliban was going to win. That's why Donald Trump negotiated with the Taliban. He didn't negotiate with the Afghan government. They were an afterthought. He said he's negotiating with them because they're the ones who are really going to have the say in this. So it's like, we're going to get out in May of 2021, but we want you to be cool with us as we make our way out of there, right? Because it's what you decide. That's what matters, because you're the ones who are going to be in power. So everybody understood that. So what's the big surprise here? And, people are saying, oh, I saw, I think it's Richard Engel who was reporting. He's done some good reporting over the years, but he was like, passing by a beauty salon that had closed and say, oh, well, this is what the Taliban is doing. And we know that this is their history when it comes to women's rights, and it's awful. But, we know about Saudi Arabia and their history of women's rights. We know about their other countries. The real issue, the issue is, can we solve every nation's problems? And can we correct every social injustice? And if we're going to try to, are we going to do it by sending ground troops in there and committing them for 20 years? And are we going to spend $2 trillion and lose 6,000 military and civilian lives? And it's not just the lives lost, Carlos. It's like, think of some of these soldiers who had to go and then go back again, and to be out there for really long times in a really dangerous hotspot. So, to me, Biden was just doing what Trump had already negotiated, what most people in both parties thought was probably the right thing, and there was some clumsiness in the execution. But I found that people were saying, "Oh, this is a disaster for Biden. This is a defeat for him." And I'm thinking, well, we knew it was a defeat. We knew that this was going to be essentially a military defeat. That was the negotiation deal. So I thought. I found this week that so people were throwing criticism at him or saying it was his disaster, and then his defenders were saying, "Well, no, it was Trump's disaster because he's the one who negotiated it." And I stepped back and I said, I think of the 4 presidents who served during this 20-year period, I am most comfortable with the 2 of them in terms of Afghanistan. Now, anybody who's read my column knows I got a lot of issues with Donald Trump. And I think I'll just say it. I think he's a person of very low character. And I think, I agree. I don't agree with Ted Cruz on a lot of things, but I think when Ted Cruz said in 2015 during the primary race that Trump doesn't know the difference between the truth and the lie, I think there's something to that. So I don't have a high regard for Trump, but I'll say this: he views foreign policy as he views most things in a very transactional way. Like, what's the bottom line thing? Is this, and sometimes I don't think that's the right approach. Like with NATO, he just looks at NATO as a scam because he thinks, hey, we're putting all this money in, and what are we getting out of this deal? So I'm not saying that that approach is always the best, but in one way, I think his transactional approach to foreign policy is really good because he's not wedded to some of the old classic thinking about how we should conduct our foreign policy, which was I think what got us into Iraq and Afghanistan in the first place. This idea that it's okay for us to go in to occupy a country. I think we've had 13 or 14 cases now where the U.S. has invaded foreign countries. It usually ends up in a big mess. And in the case of both Iraq and Afghanistan, we broke it, so we had to buy it, and we had to try to maintain the peace because we owed it to them. And I do feel bad for the people of Afghanistan because we do have some responsibility as a country because we disrupted everything there. We put in a new government and we stayed there for 20 years, and so there's a feeling now that we've created a new order there for them, and to just pull the rug out, that's not the greatest thing.
Yeah.
But the problem was getting in there in the first place, and I think Bush he always said, I don't believe in nation building, but then he did it. And Obama would not have admitted that he liked nation building, but yet he was a supporter of Afghanistan. He increased the troop levels. And I think, I'm sorry to get you ramble, but the last thing I'll say is just that I believe by the time Bush left office in January 2009, he had to know that we were in a corner because the Taliban was never going to be wiped out. Or I should say that the Afghan government that was put in place was never going to be solid enough to maintain its hold without U.S. troops. So what are we going to do? Keep our troops there for 100 years? Or we don't want to do that. But if we leave, so Bush was thinking, I'm sure I'm just going to kick the can down the road and keep our troops there. And Obama, I'm sure, thought, I don't want to be the president who's presiding over. This is what happened with Biden shows why you see Bush kicking the can down the road and Obama inheriting the situation and saying, I'm going to kick the can down. Why? Because of what we've seen this week. Because the president who happens to be in office, Biden has been in office for 7 months out of the 20 years, but he's getting all the blame or most of the blame, and it's ridiculous. But he just happened to be the guy. So it's his defeat. Well, if Obama had taken the same action and pulled troops out 7, 8 years ago, it would have been on him, right? So,
yeah. What? So, what about the take that because you said the hot take right now, right? So it's the media hot take, the 24-hour cycle,
right?
But the hot take, you saw the media align itself mostly towards being that they objected to Biden's actions, so usually you kind of know the two sides, who the players are in this wrestling match, right? But they kind of started, they morphed into one, and so how much power does the media have to push the narrative for war? Meaning, like, you said, kick the can down the road. Well, because no president wants to have the media blitz, negative media blitz that they just are giving right now to Biden, So Obama didn't want the same thing. Trump tried to be halfway, right? Like negotiate to the next thing, use it as leverage to get voted again but he also didn't want to be the guy to have it and stuff like that. So how much power does the media have to push the pace for something like foreign policy? Because you know what? They are more connected to this because they have their I guess, and you could speak more to this, their sources, their the people their interpreters that they talk to. So they have more personal connections to an involvement, like overseas involvement. But, as someone like us that just sees the news, we don't see that background production that's there. But we also can kind of appreciate a little bit the old school style of something like Biden saying, I'm sticking to it. I'm sticking to it. I'm sticking, like I said, I've said that, hey, you give Trump credit for getting the ball rolling and then you give Biden for hitting the strike or whatever, just calling balls and strikes. But how much power does the media have to push a narrative for war for 20 years? I mean, do they have that much leverage to, they're also almost showing future presidents, hey, if you pull out of anywhere else, Biden or anybody, you're going to get blitzed in this way. I mean, how much power do they have?
It's a great point. And I don't think they even realize that. I think obviously TV has a lot of power because they're showing images from there. And some of them are really sad images, people trying to evacuate. And then those are going viral. And so in that social media climate, it has a lot of impact. But I was thinking, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, this isn't exactly like Vietnam, but the thing that I see as similar is, Lyndon Johnson comes in 1963, and he's dealing with the Vietnam War. My understanding of his position really changed years ago when I listened to like a phone conversation he had, and I cannot remember who he was talking to, but this was maybe it's 1965, maybe even a little bit earlier. So this is pretty early, before the real expansion, the escalation of Vietnam had really, really, really taken off. And he's basically saying things like, "I just don't see how we're going to win this thing. I don't see any good ending to it." He's already predicting, 10 years in advance, nearly 10 years in advance, that this is going to basically be a stalemate, that there's no path to victory for the United States, and he's basically saying, "I don't know what to do. Like I'm just totally stuck here. I don't know what to do." And the way I took it was, probably the main reason he didn't know what to do was because I think there's either in that conversation or another conversation, there's a point where he said something like, "I'm not going to go down as the first president, to lose a war, or I'm not going to be the first. I don't want to go down as a president who lost, to the communists or whatever." So you have the sense, and we think back on Vietnam, it was so unpopular, and we think of protesters, but in 1964, 65, the war was supported by most people. And Lyndon Johnson's, the political calculus for him was not like, "Oh, I need to get out because there are all these anti-war protesters." They weren't really around very much at that point. His thinking is, if I pull out right now, I'm going to be seen as this weak figure, and I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to be seen as like this guy couldn't stand up to the communist bloc, So that was the perception he had. So I think a lot of what he was doing was he was being driven by this sense that he didn't want to look weak. So it wasn't that he had conned himself into thinking we can win this thing. That's what made it even more sad to me, that he knew early on this is unwinnable. But he continued on because the alternative, which is to pull out, he couldn't stand how it was going to make him look and how he was going to be. This is my belief, that he couldn't stand how this was the way people were going to respond to it. And then Nixon comes in '69, and he's just like thinking, he could have probably started withdrawing troops immediately, but he waited about 4 years to negotiate what was essentially a defeat. I mean, it was terms of defeat. You could have negotiated that in 1969 instead of 1973, but he didn't want to be what Biden is right now. He didn't want to be seen as the guy before his reelection as the guy who's presiding over this disaster with people trying to escape Saigon and U.S. looking pathetic. So a lot of this is just out of that. And so I think that the media has a role to play in the way it handles all these things. Absolutely. And I will say this, that I think that part of the 24-hour news cycle with nonstop TV news, part of it is that things really burn very intensely, but they also can fade pretty quickly. And I've learned enough to say, I don't know what people are going to think about how Biden handled this in 6 months or a year, but I would caution people to not think that, oh my God, a year from now, everyone's going to look at this the same way that everybody's talking about it today. Where like, oh my God, he looks so weak and he's inept and he doesn't know what he's doing and it's chaos. Some of that's going to get forgotten. And I think also, we're talking about Afghanistan. I really think there had to have been some kind of informal, verbal discussions between the Taliban and the administration, so that, because from what I'm seeing, they're allowing people to evacuate. We're not really seeing people. We're seeing people like, we saw people trying to get on a plane and falling to their death and so on. It's horrible. It's tragic. But I'm not, unless I've missed it, I haven't seen the Taliban like shooting at people, trying to keep them from evacuating. I think that there was some, really, if you look at this, Carlos, the U.S. had 2,500 troops, I think, by the time Trump finished negotiating that deal. Are you telling me that 2,500 American troops that the Taliban could not have beaten 2,500 American troops that were still left. I mean, the Taliban basically decided when that agreement was reached, and maybe even in the process of reaching that agreement, let's just wait this thing out. They could have taken over the country in early 2020 if they wanted, right? But they negotiated this deal and they thought, this is the path of least resistance. We wait 14, 15 months, the US gets out, it's all ours. And so I don't think they want a lot. I guess my point is, I don't think they want a lot of trouble with the United States right now. I don't think they're looking for trouble, because if they wanted trouble, they could have just taken over the country. And I don't think our 2,500 troops could have stopped them in 2020. They probably want things to go fairly smoothly at this point too. So what I'm saying is, as more people get evacuated, as this thing sort of plays out, the images that we've seen, like from a few days ago, in a year from now, those images might fade, and people might ultimately remember. I'm just glad we got out.
Yeah, no, so I'm not surprised that the Taliban is playing nice, because again, the media narrative, even back in 2001, and a lot of people don't know, and it wasn't a media narrative, it's the truth. I'm sure there's reports, and I don't think I'm speaking out of line here, is that, right after 9/11, Iran, the mortal enemy here, was trying to help us get Osama bin Laden. And then the Taliban was like, hey, we'll go get Osama bin Laden or help you, or point to you where you can get him. And like George Bush was like, nah, we don't want help from the Taliban and stuff like that. So, and because they don't really have a sense of time, 20 years to them maybe is a different way, like how we see it. We have basketball seasons and football seasons. These vatos have fighting seasons. So for a country that has fighting seasons, it's a different mentality. So
they probably have more patience. We're an impatient society, and they're from their perspective, they're probably, that's the thing. They would have waited 50 years. They would have waited 100 years. There was never going to be a point where they were going to say, okay, that's it. Plus, there were all kinds of questions about the Afghan government, and over the years, in Obama's recent book that came out, which was really interesting to me when he talks about Afghanistan, because in the 2008 debate with John McCain, he's saying the problem with the Bush administration was, because Obama was against the Iraq War, right? So he's saying the problem was that we got sidetracked. We should have been focusing on Afghanistan. We took our eye off the ball, and we diverted all these resources to Iraq, and we lost bin Laden. We had a chance to get him. We should have been focusing on Afghanistan. And he was saying all that. So he was very pro Afghanistan. That was the war we should be really concentrating on. But if you read his recent book, he talks about visiting. I don't know if you remember, but during the 2008 campaign, before he was even president, he actually visited Afghanistan as a U.S. presidential candidate. And he talks in the book about visiting, meeting with Karzai there, and getting the feeling of having heard stories about corruption in the government, and really questioning whether this government had the support of the people, sensing that it probably didn't. So it's very interesting that he talks about feeling, even in that moment, some real doubts about Afghanistan. But if in terms of how he handled it publicly, he goes from 30-some thousand troops to 100,000 troops in that first year. So
do people that go, and you went, so like to these Ivy League schools and that have maps, world maps, and they just see pieces on the board, like, is Afghanistan the prize for all the empires over history? Like, hey, is finally somebody going to get Afghanistan, and it's still Afghanistan is still Afghanistan, where it's still like I was saying, I don't know if I don't even know if they know that people know them as the graveyard of empires. Even Biden said it in his speech, which I thought was kind of shocking to me, because I was like, again, right, not being super well read and educated, you could just be like, okay, they call it, these elites call it the graveyard of empires. Okay, why? Because nobody can rule it. Okay, so then what are we doing there? Like, it doesn't even take a genius to be like, what needs to happen to rule that place? Well, no one really has really done it. And I don't know. If the place is called the graveyard of empires, maybe we shouldn't be there,
Well, if you studied, I'm no student of history, but if you studied what the Soviet Union went through, in the 80s, that should have been a sobering lesson. But, there is this sense in the U.S. Look, in my opinion, we've had invasions for maybe three reasons. One which was like strategic, which was during the Cold War, we trying to fight communism, or at least believing that that was the justification. One has been economic. The United Fruit Company gets kicked out of Guatemala, so we're going to overthrow the government and put in a government that's going to let our big U.S. company go in there. And there was some of that happened with Iran too in the 50s with England and the United States, worrying about oil company interests and so on. So there's been the economic thing, and then the other thing has just been imperialist, things, which I'd like to believe the U.S. has moved somewhat away from that motivation. But certainly, if you look at some of the, the history with the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and even you go back to Hawaii in the 1890s. I mean, a lot of this was the U.S. being very, expansionist and imperialistic. So I think those have been the main motivations, for this. But I don't understand. I'd like to think that Bush, though I think he made big mistakes with both Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd like to think that, particularly with Afghanistan, that he probably went in thinking this is what I have to do to avenge the 9/11 attack. But this notion that it comes out of the nice way of looking at it would be like idealism, but I think I see it more as arrogance, which is the U.S. arrogance that we can go in there and we can remake this other country, and that our system is always going to work. I mean, I've historically, like I've looked at Latin America and a little bit over the years, and if you look historically, you've had some countries, that are very agrarian, and that you have incredible income inequality, and you've had maybe a tendency or a movement within certain countries to go towards socialism, and then particularly during the Cold War, people would be all up in arms in this country. I'm not talking about Cuba by the way, but I'm just talking about in general, because we've seen similar movements in other countries. And I think, in this country, it would be like, oh my God, and we can't have this. But I am very much a believer that, and we might see it differently on this, but I'm very much a believer that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to governing. I think if you have a very small country that's mainly rural, and you've got a few people who are like billionaires, and you've got 90% of people just, living like basically in poverty, that you might want to consider some different approaches to governing. And that might work for them. And it doesn't mean that it has to work for us, and in the same way that I don't even believe fiscal policy in government should always be the same. I think sometimes you should react to. I think what FDR did during the Great Depression, it had not everything worked, but I think that there was some value in what he did in that time period. But it might have not been the right approach in a different time. So I'm not really real rigid as far as my view that one system works for every country and one approach works at all times. And so, but the United States has this idea that our system can be exported and should be exported. Not just that it can be, but it should be. And everybody should be just like us. And they should have a system just like us. And I certainly believe in everybody having the right to vote and democratic system, but I don't believe our approach to governing and our type of society is the society that everybody else wants or should have. And so I think we're probably in agreement on this, Carlos, that I just don't believe that the U.S. should be imposing its will on the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to say, Gilbert, but in Biden's speech and listening to you, and then I forgot to call this on when I was giving, because I was giving praise to Biden by saying, good, on the speech, I heard this and this, and what else did you expect from him? But I did recall that he was kind of putting down the curtain on the Afghanistan stage, but he was raising a new curtain, which was towards Africa in that speech. He spoke of Somalia. So he's almost to me now. And I didn't say that when I posted about it. And now I'm saying it now is that the resources are just going to shift towards another sphere, another area. And, we'll start having to learn the names of all of these new terrorist groups in Africa. And that actually leads to some of the similarities that I've been trying to, and we can shift here is that I've kind of said in previous podcasts that I've had when I've talked to people about foreign policy and health and all these things that are going on is that, and this week it kind of confirms something that I have, and I just want to fill you out on this because is that terrorism is a stateless threat. It doesn't have borders.
Right.
Well, a virus also is a stateless threat that doesn't have borders. Yeah. But what I was saying was that, hey, you know what? I will just say, like in the future talk, is that, hey, I wouldn't be surprised that if in 10, 15 years, just the same way that we were hearing about different terrorist groups that would come out, this name, that name, this name, that name, there was always that threat that there's going to be the new variants and this and that. And I'm doing these these things, but only as a way to know how government reacts to each, and how it functions in parallel to our liberty and to our freedom. So I'm trying to put that narrative out there, but not out there, but I just want to get your take that I know it's not the same, but the government reactions can be similar, is that they're going to go straight towards a security state feature rather than, hey, be personally responsible and improve your own, don't worry about terrorism. It's a very low percentage. Something's going to happen to you. Don't live in fear. Or, hey, you know what? The virus stuff, it's out there. Do the best you can, get the best information, but hey, also improve your health profile. Hey, you can't solve everything. Just take care of yourself. So that's kind of something that I'm trying to find if there's similarities or not. And you could check me too, man, if you think I'm wrong on that kind of idea. I just do it. Yeah, go ahead, man.
I do disagree. So I'll get to the virus thing, but I would say, like, on terrorism, like, I do think that the government has a responsibility to try to keep people safe. And I think that there were some things that were done after 9/11 that were positive. I think that increasing airport security, I don't know that everything, I mean, it was too easy prior to September 11, 2001, for somebody to take a weapon on a plane, and for somebody for one person to be able to go on there and do people harm. And it shouldn't have been that easy. When you're talking about that many people traveling together and in a confined space where there's no escape, really. So I think that there's some things that were done well. Now, obviously, with the Patriot Act and stuff like that, the government went too far, and people were too willing to accept, oh, well, we're so scared. People make mistakes out of fear, and the government can exploit that fear. And I think, whether Bush and some of his allies, had good or bad intentions, the Patriot Act and some of those things, and the invasion of people's privacy went too far. But I do think the government has a role to play in that, and I certainly would say I just don't think that nation building is the way to go with that. I would say with the virus that the big difference there to me is just that, we can see demonstrably, like, we can see people coming out of, we know people. I think we all know people who've been hospitalized, or people who've been on ventilators. We know people, or if we haven't experienced it in our own family, we have friends who've had family members who've passed away. I mean, we're seeing this. This is real. And I am always somewhat leery of government. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I worry too much that people now always go, we should question everything. But I think that the automatic knee-jerk thing to say everything is a conspiracy. Most of the conspiracy theories that I've heard in my lifetime, from the conspiracy to kill JFK to this and this and this and this, 9/11 was an inside job. I think any of those things, when you start to think about them, I don't want to get too sidetracked.
No. But I don't think I was talking of conspiracy, because I didn't say the word they. I'm just saying that, like, government's policy reactions to a threat that doesn't have a nation state flag around it. So, so China they tried to put it on China, right? But it's a virus. It goes everywhere, just like the idea of terrorism can. So a state that has a flag, a nation state, doesn't know how to maneuver when it's dealing with those type of threats, So I just want to have those parallels to be able to reference. And so that was my next question, is that, so, was that, looking at it in that light, what would be the lessons? So the similar, the lessons learned of Afghanistan, is there any lessons that we can learn that from Afghanistan that we can try to use towards how we're going to tackle something that's going to be around for a long time, I think, and also have the balance, and maybe not a balance, have a balance more towards our liberty than the government's overreactions that we agree that there's overreaction, something like that. I'm trying to be in there. So that's, so again, the calling balls and strikes, I'm trying, there's a middle ground that I'm trying to be in,
Yeah, I hear you. Well, one thing that I was thinking about was that, I mean, I've heard, like radio talk hosts and stuff like that say, and I've heard this in reference to like last year toward Mayor Nirenberg and County Judge Nelson Wolf, is that, that on some level, and this is kind of a conservative.
And for anybody that doesn't know, this is a San Antonio politics. So anybody that's out there.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. But kind of the conservative critique of them, because they've both been very strong advocates for restrictions that would, in the interest of trying to slow the spread of the virus. And I mean, the conservative critique that I've heard against them at various times is that they kind of enjoy. I wouldn't say that the argument has been made that they enjoy that the virus happened. And I don't think anybody said that, but I've heard the argument that they almost enjoyed that there's a situation in which they were able to exert control over people's lives. And I just don't buy that. And maybe it's because I know both of them. I don't, not to say that they've done everything right, but I don't believe that when Ron Nirenberg got elected mayor in 2017, he was thinking, man, I really hope we have some kind of crisis so I can make sure that I can keep people from leaving their house and make everybody wear a mask. Because man, that's been my goal in life, to be an elected official who makes people wear masks, because I get off on restricting their lives. I mean, let's be real. Ron Nirenberg, the last thing in the world he wanted to deal with was something like this. Really, I think any elected official who's halfway rational, has any compassion for people, this is the last thing that they would want. And I think they've tried to find a balance, but everybody's gotten it wrong. I mean, Abbott was early on, he was shutting things down, shutting down certain businesses and so on, when the infection rates were relatively low compared to now. And now we got the Delta variant where like kids are getting it in bigger numbers than we've seen, and it's spreading so much more. And now he's saying, oh, that time has passed. We're not doing it. Well, it doesn't, but the time was okay. Like, you put a mask mandate in place in July of 2020, and we're actually doing worse now. So why has the time passed? Is it just like Afghanistan? This is maybe where it's the parallel with Afghanistan. We just reached a point where it's like, okay, we're tired of this. Is there a reason for cutting out now as opposed to 10 years ago? Is Afghanistan more secure? Is the Afghan government more solid? Has the Taliban been wiped out? No, we're just tired of it. We got to get out. Enough. 20 years is enough. Well, I think with Abbott, it's just enough is enough. I don't want to go back to the restrictions. I don't want to go back to a mask mandate. I don't care if kids are being required to go in person in school, and a bunch of schools now are having 20, 30, 50 kids getting infected, and schools are struggling to deal with it. I don't care. I'm not going to impose a mask mandate. And not only that, I'm not even going to let schools decide for themselves. Because remember, early on in 2020, he was saying every county is different. Let the local ones decide. I don't want to tell. Now he's not even letting them do that. Now he's saying you can't impose a mask mandate.
Yeah. Right? The inconsistency is always there from like the people that that we like, someone like me, and where I come, likes decentralized government. So, they like it decentralized from the feds, but when it's in Austin, then it's okay, if it's on their team. Yeah, I don't like that shit, man. I like it too. I want to be consistent, all throughout,
Well, the conservative philosophy or the small government philosophy is, and I think you have this belief, is that, the closer, it's the old expression, I'm going to get the quote wrong, but it's, government works best when it's closest to the people. Well, ideally, that should mean local city government or county government. But obviously, we know the way the state is, and probably other states too, that our cities tend to be, more liberal politically. Our elected officials are more liberal. We've got a state that's pretty conservative at the state level. So local control is not an appealing thing to Greg Abbott or Dan Patrick when he's dealing with big metropolitan areas. So he's trying to shut this down and take away the power. He's been doing that for years. So I would just say that honestly, I think that the effort, I don't really see any elected official. If they're out there, I've missed it. But in our experience in Texas, I have not seen elected officials saying, we're trying to impose these restrictions because we want to control people's lives. I really think everybody's struggling. I mean, if we put ourselves in the shoes of anybody who's like a mayor or a county judge or even a superintendent of a school district, man, this is a tough time because personal responsibility, I'm a believer in it. But when you're talking about two people having a little bit of interaction, speaking to each other, and that Delta variant is getting spread like that, and then I think that the average, I think I saw something about, on the average, each person spreads it to like 6 people or something like that. I could be way under reporting that. So, I mean, we're talking about personal responsibility is great, but then if you infect your kid and then your kid goes to school and your kid infects a bunch of kids and then some of them end up on ventilators, or, personal responsibility, what is that? How does that factor in when you're talking about spreading this to an entire community? In a perfect world, if everybody took all the responsible actions, that would be great. I think in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to mandate anything because in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to have cops checking to see if you're speeding or checking to see if you're wearing your seatbelt or because everybody would be so responsible. And it's a utopian vision. And I love the concept, but do we really think everybody is so responsible? I've seen a lot of people be really irresponsible.
Yeah, no.
The virus, and I don't want to take people's liberties away, but I think if you're an elected official, man, it's a real struggle to think, who am I representing? Am I representing the people who are being irresponsible and are spreading it all over the place? Or am I trying to represent the other people who are trying to do all the right things and keep everybody safe, but they could end up getting on a ventilator or worse because of somebody else's irresponsibility? And I'm trying to weigh these things out in the face of a pandemic that we haven't seen in 100 years.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, man, I've always taken the private property take on it, and then I just respected everybody's private property, and people respected mine. And if I wanted to enter someone's establishments and they had their own rules, I would respect their ruls.
Yeah.
And if I always I just lived out as best as I could the principles that if I'm talking personal responsibility and private property, I just try to apply it the best way I can. And yeah, I understand that for sure. It's hard for public officials because they do have the power to enact policy, and they're trying to find this balance.
And the thing too is that I mean, people get like nightclubs, music venues, bars. So when they've had some of them in some places have said, you want to come in and see a live music performer, you got to show proof of vaccination. We're not letting. And I know that's a controversial thing, but we're also in an extreme situation, and all those other people who've been vaccinated and have maybe been really careful, they're going to see this. They're going to be jam-packed in this place with you. Possibly. Yeah. And we've accepted for years that restaurants have signs outside the door or a policy saying no shoes, no shirt, no service. We don't think, oh my God, they've taken away all our liberties. We think it's their private business. They don't want me coming in here with no shirt, no shoes, and I don't have to go there if I don't want to.
Yeah.
If you don't want to go see Jason Isbell perform, who's a singer-songwriter, who said, if you want to come see me, you got to be vaccinated. I'm not performing for anybody who's not vaccinated. Now, if you don't like it, there's nobody forcing you to go see Jason Isbell, right? So I'm saying that these are balanced rights, and a lot of things that people are complaining about, they're not being forced into. They're simply being, a lot of it has to do really with like private enterprise saying, this is our rule and you can take it or leave it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what, since that's my default setting, I don't get hung up emotionally on it. Like, it's like, and I'm an entrepreneur. So then my automatic thinking is that, hey, if there's a way to make money to counter somebody's, just like the way that back in the, whatever, like if they don't want to serve them, then an entrepreneur will come in and start serving those people, and the market will make a space for anything like that. So, my default is private property. So I never really got like hung up on it. It was, I just respect people's, private property. And really, if you do that, you don't get too emotional about it. And to be out in public though, then, that's different too. Like, I mean, if I want to do whatever I want to do in public, well, then, I would say, then it comes to like in public, it's open, to me, that is the way it is, like outside of private property, business and that. But I know then, so, okay, so that might be an issue, something that creeps into the, like, hey, well, if you have it and you're in open public, does the government have a right to mandate a mask or this or that out in public? I don't think it does, because somebody has the right to stay home if they want, just like I have the right to leave my home. But in private property, hey, you can do whatever that's your shit. So I don't know. Can we talk about that? I mean, that's a little bit more. That comes into the real. Like, we're getting past the, like, I think we're in agreement of private property, or like, I ain't gonna tell you what to do on your house or your private business, or you have your own rules, because we kind of agreed on that a little bit. What about out in public? That gets a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the government under extreme conditions has the right. I mean, this is really a crisis situation, and I think that you're balancing it out as like, say, a mayor or a local official, trying to think. I mean, do you want your, and we're also dealing with, when we talk about personal responsibility, we're also talking about hospitals that are running out of beds, and if you have a heart attack, I mean, let's put COVID aside. If you have a heart attack and you have to be hospitalized right now, is there going to be a hospital bed for you? Because they're getting overwhelmed, and we're getting close to the point of where there's not enough beds. But if this continues, if the surge continues, we're not gonna have enough. There's gonna be a shortage. We're near capacity in many places, but we're gonna go past that. And if you have a car accident, or if you have a heart attack or something like that, are you even going to be able to get an ICU bed, right? So again, if you're the mayor of a city, you're like, how do I balance that out? So I think that there is a right to mandate some of these things in public places. I think there's individual mistakes that I think were made locally. Like, if I remember right, like last Thanksgiving, there was a curfew for that weekend, which I think was a bad idea. You're basically telling people you can't go out. I think it was 10 o'clock or something like that. I'm thinking, like, I don't know that after 10, I don't know that after 10 o'clock, it was things were going to necessarily be any more dangerous. I mean, you could say, well, people might go to bars or something, but if it's a matter of like going to visit family members on Thanksgiving weekend at 10:30 as opposed to 9:30, I'm not sure that there was much point in that. And I think that probably there's probably some recognition of that was a mistake. I think they closed some city parks for some holidays last year. There's some things. I mean, they've been tinkering, trying to get it right. They're dealing I mean, just like the scientists have been trying to get it right. I know there are probably people out there who think, Dr. Fauci is the evil genius who wanted to, Dr. Fauci wanted to get everybody sick because he's just a crazy evil man or something like that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm willing to believe the possibility that there was some accident in a lab in China. I don't know. I probably shouldn't even get there because I don't know what happened. But if anybody really thinks that Dr. Fauci is responsible for this thing, so then that gets him, he gets to be the hero and pretend like, that it's some kind of evil, diabolical thing. I mean, I don't know what to tell somebody like that, So,
well, you know what? And kind of a little bit back to like your original piece that you wrote about Trump and Biden. Like, it's two spectrums politically, and I'd like to think that maybe Fauci is right and Rand Paul is right, and really it's a meshing of two worlds. And maybe this is like a cliche. Oh, the right is right in the middle. There's somewhere in a middle that both sides can come together on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I like to think that not that Fauci isn't the evil man and that Rand Paul isn't the evil man, and that there's probably some, you know what I'm trying to say a little bit, right? A little bit.
I do. The thing for me is that it's not just Fauci, but the CDC and so on. Other scientists who've spoken out. We see Dr. Peter Hotez in Houston, I think, who's done great work, but he's gotten a lot of, he's had to deal with a lot of abuse from people. And people will say, oh, they were telling us Fauci was saying don't wear a mask, and he said wear a mask, and he said, you know, we, they were dealing with something new here. This was a new beast. I mean, there were differences in this virus. There were things that they were learning along the way. Plus, also in the case of the masks, there was the fear that people were all buying up surgical masks. There were going to be enough for people in the hospital. So they were telling the rest of us, hold off on that right now. But also they're learning along the way. When you're dealing with something new, you're learning and you're adjusting. And I think that to say, well, you told us this, and then 3 months later you told us that, and what's wrong with you? I understand the frustration. I get frustrated too. But I mean, we have to realize that they're learning new things. I mean, there's new studies coming out all the time. The information initially about how the vaccine responded to the Delta variant was much more glowing than it is now. Now they're basically saying, the main benefit is really, when it comes to the Delta variant, is just that it'll maybe limit how sick you get. But
and then now they're talking about the third booster, right? And then so.
But they're learning along the way, and I think that the frustration, we have this mentality of like they should know everything, and if new information comes along and they're learning new things, they're saying, well, we're going to adjust what we were saying, and we were saying we thought based on the previous strains that this vaccine is not. Let's be real, Carlos. The vaccine initially was really just about, like most vaccines, was just to keep you from getting really sick. But then along the way, there are some studies indicating, well, this thing actually can keep you from even getting non-symptomatic infection and from spreading it. And so people got, oh, this is fantastic. Well, with the Delta variant, that isn't so true. But it's still, by and large, is keeping people from getting very, very sick. And I think that, we're learning new things along the way, new studies, are finding new things. And we have to have some tolerance for the fact that they're learning along the way and they're trying to get us the information. And we get really impatient because we think that they're supposed to know everything about a virus that continues to surprise us and that continues to produce new variants that are, every one has a different set of rules, different playbook for everyone.
Yeah, so one of my takes, and maybe we can get an agreement on this and then we can kind of shift to some other subjects, is that that personal responsibility hasn't been, at least I don't hear it, and maybe I'm wrong, hasn't been pushed as strong as like any type of government policy. And that's to say, however you want to say, I mean, I'm joking around. I could say, hey, do you really need that third taco? You don't, hey, if you're a little bit more overweight or diabetes and this and that, you have a different take, hey, what can you control in your life? That's your health. So maybe you should go outside and be healthier. It's always been kind of like not that should be like a big part of the forefront. And then I would be like, okay, there's the government side of it, but the government at least is telling everybody, hey, get your health in order too. Like, just don't look at us like for the solutions. Hey, look in the mirror, fix your own shit,
I believe that. And that's the thing with the vaccine, although there have been some, there have been some efforts to try to mandate vaccines, like, city government and different things. And, but primarily, this has basically been a voluntary thing. And we've had leaders telling people, get vaccinated. But that's personal responsibility. That's basically a decision that people are making. And, millions of people have decided not to do it. The third taco thing, I hear you, but, you have a third taco, it's not going to result in 5 or 6 people being sent to the hospital because you chose to have a third taco. But, your actions regarding, the vaccine, the virus, you could take some other people's lives with you.
Yeah. I guess it'd be interesting to know that the third taco only represents like our overall health profile. And if in this run, because we weren't going out and this and that, we end up increasing like our body mass we just got fatter and unhealthier, and then it's a perpetual thing. And it turns out that then like again, like the Afghanistan stuff, in 10 years we look back and be like, man, yeah, I guess we made some mistakes, and then you just learn and you learn from them, and you learn from them, and hopefully since it's all based on adjustments, and there's also people that are dying that we know, and it's an interesting balance, and maybe we can agree that people aren't the evil boogeyman they're trying to make them out to be, because it's easy to talk shit from the stands, right? I mean, it's harder to be in the game, but everybody's trying their best. I guess I do take the take that everybody's trying their best.
Yeah.
So changing a little bit of course here, a little bit, is because the show is called Libertinos, so I take a liberty angle, being a Latino. I wanted to talk about the immigration issue here in like nationally and in Texas. I'd like to get your take on your narrative or story. I would like to say kind of like from the Obama to Trump into Biden, because that's kind of the arch that most people might remember. A lot of people might not know, Reagan did amnesty and things like that. I mean, a lot of people will, but my generation will not even know that some people, like the guy that everybody likes on the right, he did amnesty. They'll be like, well, people probably freak out, So you could touch on that. Can you give kind of the narrative as you see it, and also the tactics of fear that both sides use to push an agenda, but is the agenda good for the cause of, I guess, the people on the border, but also the people on this side? It's a big question. I'm trying to ask you here. Try your best to see if you can answer some of that.
Sure. Well, I think that one of the things that has frustrated me over the years, in recent years, has been that, I mean, like when Trump ran in 2015, he said, obviously in that infamous speech that he made when he announced the campaign, Mexico's not sending their best, which was, I always thought was very weird, because it was kind of comparing it to like Castro opening up his jails in 1979 or 1980 and sending people. This was what we would see, historically with Mexico. Was not Mexico sending people. It was individual people who were usually living in dire conditions in Mexico saying, I'm going to try to find some kind of better life. And if I have to sneak across the border to do it, so it wasn't people. Mexico was sending people. Individuals were choosing to come and putting themselves in danger. So they're not sending their best. All that. I obviously had a lot of problems with the way he put it. But one of the things that frustrated me too is that really by that point, and this has continued to be true, that the major issue we've had with immigration or with border policy has not necessarily been we still see some of this, but it's not primarily the old, image that people have of people sneaking across the border from Mexico. There's some of that, but the main issue that we've had has been the influx of people from Central America who are seeking asylum. And so many times when I hear people talk about, illegals and this, they're using these terms. Seeking asylum is a legal process. It is a legal right that people have. You are allowed to come to the border and seek asylum. That doesn't mean you're going to receive asylum. There's a process that you go through, and some people are accepted and some people are going to be rejected. But it is a legal process. And Trump tried to do some things, to kind of cut off some of the places where people could come, ports of entry, so that people would make it harder, or they would only let so many people in a day, basically just so people would get frustrated and quit. He tried to make it as difficult as possible. But these issues, I mean, we're talking about primarily the influx of people, the overwhelming, this issue that we've had has been with the legal process of asylum. And I think that the obvious thing we have to do is, which has been talked about, is just to try to expedite that process as much as you can, to try to whatever resources have to go into asylum courts so that we can make this process move faster, so that these cases can be processed, so that either they get to stay or they don't, but it moves faster. But what the policy has been, and truthfully, Obama was not that different than Trump in this way, and even Biden now, is that the policy has been deterrence. You just try that the government has basically taken, even if they come in with a different attitude, because Biden as a candidate was saying, if people want to seek asylum, we welcome and we come. But as president, and if you look at what he has said and Kamala Harris said, it's back to this deterrence, which is we want to make the process of seeking asylum, so miserable for people that other people, they're going to say, I give up. And other people from their countries, their Central American countries primarily, are going to say, oh, this is horrible, I'm not going to come. So that's really been the policy. I don't think that's a really great approach necessarily, but that's been the policy. So if you look at what Trump did, which now Republicans are very mad that Biden, Trump had this policy of remain in Mexico.
Yeah.
Place, right. So basically, you still had the right to seek asylum, but instead of coming to the border and then maybe being put in a shelter for a while, and then maybe put together with some family or something while your case was processed in the United States, instead you're going to have to stay on the Mexican side. Now, people can debate this policy, but one of the things that I hear, and I hear it like from Congressman Chip Roy and everything, he'll take pictures. He'll go down to the border and he'll go to some shelter and he'll take pictures of like a toilet that looks, it's just horrible, a bathroom. Oh my God, look at these humanitarian conditions of people, discussing that people are being put in these conditions. And that's not untrue. But I'm saying if your case is, look at this, what a humanitarian disaster this is. Are you saying then that the preferable thing is to tell people while your case is being processed, we want you to stay just on the Mexican side of the border where you're basically living homeless, camping out in a tent for a year or a year and a half, and people. So if somebody wants to commit a crime, they can attack you and your family, or you can get robbed, or you have to deal with weather conditions, and you're out there basically for endlessly. I mean, is that a more humanitarian? So don't. I would just say the politicians who are saying, if they're saying, oh, it's because even Trump's saying now, he went on Shanghai a few months ago, oh, it's so terrible, these kids and the humanitarian crisis. You put in place Remain in Mexico, and Chip Roy supports Remain in Mexico. There's no way you can look at that as a humanitarian approach. So what Biden has said, we've had people there for 2 years on the Mexican side of the border waiting for the cases to be processed. I mean, so he's saying, okay, let's have these people in. Now, the actual numbers, I think, are relatively small, a few thousand people. I don't know the exact numbers, but they're not really that big. They don't really account. Those numbers don't account for this big surge that we've seen. But Republicans have gone to town with this issue of Biden. It's open borders. I don't see an open border, but I do think that he's changed that one policy, because I don't see how you really justify it. The only justification for Remain in Mexico is that you're basically making it so horrible for those people that you're sending the message, hey, nobody else come, because look at what they're having to do. They're going to have to spend 2 years living out homeless on the Mexican side of the border. So that's been the policy. Just make it horrible. Separate families. Make it horrible. Now, Biden's not doing the separation, but he's going along with certain things. And the Title 42 thing was during the pandemic, we're not going to let anybody come in. Biden has continued that. I mean, I don't know if how many Republicans are aware of this. When they talk about open borders, Biden has continued that. He's basically he's dealing with Remain in Mexico because those were existing cases, but with new people coming, except for unaccompanied kids. That's the one big change he made to Title 42. But otherwise, they're sending them back. So there's a lot of, I don't have the answers, Carlos, but I will say that a policy that's basically built on, let's just make it so horrible and miserable. And we're not talking about making it horrible and miserable for people who are trying to illegally sneak across the border. We're talking about making it horrible and miserable for somebody who wants to follow the legal process of seeking asylum. We just want to make it so awful for those people that they're just going to be like, oh my God, I'm going to give up, and I'm going to and we're going to get the word out in all our countries that if you come, it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
There's got to be a better policy than that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that leads to my next question. And that's kind of then goes towards, and I'm going to I have some questions here as I know to respect your time. That leads to my next question is, what is going on with the Alamo? Because, when I got into the Republican Party through the Ron Paul campaign to support of his candidacy, man, the one thing that I saw rage in people's faces was anything that had to do with immigration. And it was weird, man. I remember just being like taken aback. It was just something passionate about that, but it was about the narrative about the Mexican side getting into the narrative of our society or whatever. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the Alamo, because it touches some of that? But my take is that I have no, I don't have a stake like some of the stakeholders do, but also I want to be a tourist in my own city, so I wouldn't mind seeing some new shit. But anyway, that's just my take.
On the point that you're making about immigration, I mean, we've seen like Tucker Carlson basically said that there is a concerted attempt on the part of Democrats to let people in from other cultures into the country so they can change, so that basically that these people of other ethnicities and will come in and they will then flood our the electorate, and white people will then be outnumbered. I mean, and he's already making that case that if we let people in from Afghanistan, that's going to be part of that. So there, that is definitely a thought that you're hearing a lot in
a scare tactic, fear tactic, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's really an absurd way of looking at it. We have challenges on the border, and I'm not a sort of believer in open borders, and I think that you have to have laws, and I think you have to have a process and everything. But all that kind of rhetoric is really a scare tactic. When it comes to the Alamo, I understand how much it means to people, and I've always I'll tell you what, it might be a weird comparison, but I used to live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I've always felt Memphis and San Antonio were like kindred cities in a way, because they're both old river cities, and they're both majority populations. The majority population in Memphis is African American. The majority population in San Antonio is Latino. They're in Memphis, they're both also, they attract a lot of tourists. Both of them, they also have a military presence in both cities. But in Memphis, the big thing obviously was Graceland, and that was the big tourist attraction. People, would come to see Elvis Presley's home. But everybody that I knew that lived there, they didn't necessarily dislike Elvis Presley, but if you mentioned Graceland, they would kind of roll their eyes, because it was, it's a tourist attraction, so it's important to the economy of Memphis. But if you lived there, most of the people I knew who lived there never went there, had never been there, never visited. Everybody who visited would go first place, But people there were kind of, and so I've kind of had that attitude about the Alamo. I think there's a lot of mythology around it, which that new book, Forget the Alamo, I think exposes some of that. I know there's a lot of controversy about that, but I think that to me, they have acknowledged they're working on standing on the shoulders of scholars who've looked into that, who've looked into original documents, who've seen the letters of some of these Texas independence fighters who were talking about how they didn't want to have slavery taken away from them.
Yeah, no, and I'll post a link to your Puro Politics podcast on that. I listened to that, and that was interesting. So there's a narrative battle, right? There's a fight for a narrative, right?
Yeah, and I just think that there's a desire, the desire to see the Alamo as I think it's it's a really interesting piece of history, and I see it that way, and I can appreciate it on that level. But the mythology that it symbolizes, something kind of like it's something kind of sacred, that it's basically almost like a religious temple in some way. I don't have that belief about it, and I try to be respectful to people who do. But I just think that if they're going to be that way, let's not pretend that James Bowie was some wonderful heroic guy when he was a slave trader who was smuggling black men into Louisiana and selling them into slavery over there, just for money. Let's not pretend that he was some wonderful guy. Let's not whitewash history. We don't need to do that. We can appreciate that something historic happened at the Alamo, that it's a fascinating story, but let's not. But we're seeing both at the national and the state level that people, that even historical fact now is partisan, and to question. I mean, I've seen this all my life. That there's always been a faction in this country that if you question, that if you talk too much about the history of segregation or Jim Crow laws or that kind of like if people started talking about that to each other, oh my God, do you hate America? Why are you talking about this? And so if you start talking about some of the I think the flaws of the people who fought for Texas independence or what their motivations might have been, then it's like, what, do you hate Texas? Or you just what's wrong with you? But because I don't understand that sensibility that I think our kids, I have a 16-year-old daughter who loves history. Our kids can handle the complexity of the facts. I want this country to be a great country. And I'm glad that I was born in this country. I really am. And I realized that there were a lot of other places with all our flaws. There are a lot of other places I could be where my life wouldn't have had as much opportunity and I wouldn't have as much freedom. And so I'm glad to be in this country. But I can also like look at all kinds of foreign policy and just sort of all kinds of things that have happened within this country, all the injustices that have happened. And we can talk about it and we can recognize it. And I don't understand when people feel like you're just, we have Abbott and Dan Patrick and so on talking about, we have to have patriotic education. Well, I don't know how it sounds to you. Patriotic education, that really sounds like almost like a kind of a Soviet bloc Iron Curtain type of approach to education. Like basically, we have to teach you this. We have this dogma, and we have to teach you. We're not gonna. We have to indoctrinate you. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. Maybe I'm sounding extreme, but it's like we have to indoctrinate you into this type of thinking rather than saying, hey, let's look at all the complexity of history and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and try to learn from it. Instead of thinking we begin our approach with the United States is we believe in American exceptionalism, and then we work backwards and try to find only the wonderful things, because we don't want to talk about the non-wonderful things because that's not patriotic.
Yeah.
I think patriotism in the good sense is an understanding and an acknowledgement of what's wrong with your society, because that's how you're going to make it better. If we didn't acknowledge the injustices, the racial injustices, particularly in the Deep South, going back historically, if we didn't acknowledge that, how are we ever going to correct it?
Yeah, or even here towards like the Hanos, all the a lot of people don't know all the stuff that went down with all the homies back in the day, man. They that they had it pretty bad.
Yeah, public swimming pools and getting wrapped on the hand if they spoke a word of Spanish in the hallways of the school. I mean, it's absurd, some of the things. And we can talk about it, and we can still say there's a lot to recommend this country, and this country has a system that allows for improving the flaws, and we have self-corrected some things along the way, and we can continue to try to do that. But I just don't get the idea of it has to be. If you don't speak of America as perfect, if you talk too much about injustice, you're a hater.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. So that goes to my final question, and kind of just wanted to fill you out on this because it's I don't hide it. It's part of my agenda, and it's been for a long time. And I've never heard anybody say it as much as I have. Actually, no, I don't. Nobody says it. I'm the only tonto that says this, but I used to say this back when we used to go back on the radio, and I would say, "Oh, Texas is going to be the first. Texas is going to win a World Cup before the United States does." And that was always to say that I'm I want Texas to secede. What is the politics of Texas and the secessionist movement in here? Whether it's something that could be put on for a vote, and then because I don't fall into the rhetoric the fear tactic that we can't do it because we saw a peaceful secession as far as in soft terms as far as Brexit. That was you can leave a bigger union and so I don't know. I'm just asking you that is part of my agenda. I don't hide it. I want Texas to be its own country. I feel that I can better my family, my community, if I just have to worry about Texas stuff. But can you kind of speak towards that in the Texas stage?
Well, one thing I've noticed, because obviously we're a Republican state, is that I didn't really hear any serious discussion about secession in this country. I mean, I'm not, and you may have been talking about it beforehand. So and I know there are individuals, but I'm talking about from, as a serious thing that was discussed by political figures. I didn't really hear it in the state until Barack Obama became president. Because you had a Democratic president who, you had a Republican leadership in the state who were against him from the very beginning, and so they was talking about, like, now it was seen as, it's not just we have a president we don't like. Now they are trying to undermine everything that we believe in. So we need to really think about, and Rick Perry sort of, as governor, kind of flirted with it. I don't think he was that serious about it, but he flirted with the rhetoric of that. I didn't hear any talk among our state political leaders about secession when Donald Trump was president, right? Did you hear any of that? No, because we're in alignment with him, right? That was their thinking. So now, will it flare up again? I don't know. I would just say that that's there are many reasons why I would be like suspicious of it, but I think that the fact that it only seems to happen in this state in any serious way, or comes up when there's a Democratic president. I mean, I think that tells you something, that it's really pretty much about when Trump was president. I think Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and others saw their patriotism for the United States was very high. And when Obama was president, it was, the federal government is, they're out of control. And so
there was a little bit too much hip hop at the White House, right? It was a little hip hoppy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's the thing. I mean, I know that you want this to happen, so I don't want to disappoint you, Greg. I don't think it's going to happen, but it would be. I'll say this: it would be really interesting, like if you could just kind of like you could test something out and then kind of go back, just do, if there was some kind of like maybe some kind of time travel thing that you could do. It would be really interesting to like live in an independent Texas for a year and see what it's like. That would be a very interesting like experiment to see. But I personally don't want to see it as, but I mean, it would be interesting to just in a short.
Yeah, man. And being sports fans, when I bring it up, because I do bring it up, because in Spanish football, Barcelona, the Catalans, they have like the secessionist movement. So I always bring it up through that way. So I mean, I don't talk about secession. The only way I talk about it really is through sports, through this. And the first thing that I would say, well, what about the Cowboys? I was like, hey, it'll be fine. I was like, the Cowboys will play in the NFL, just like, or like Canada has teams that play in the baseball, basketball. I was like, what kind of NFL or MLB or NBA would be good without any Texas teams? Like, so these guys only care about the sports. Like what's going to happen to the teams? Or they're still going to get. Yeah. And I said, yeah, man, it'll be fine. But we just joke around about it. But they don't even care about the economic or they're just like, hey, are the Spurs going to still be able to win a championship? And if Texas succeeds, and I was like, yes, they will be.
It'd be like the NHL. You got a mix of Canadian and U.S. teams, so it'd be like that.
Yeah. So just to close, man, bring it back to the original reason I brought you back, and that's just to you can give kind of like your closing thoughts a little bit on this the pull and tug that people put on you and the media, and whether it's warranted or not, or is it also just that's part of the game that everybody should always question everything, like you said?
Yeah, I think everybody should. Look, the role of the press really should be, as possible, try to get to an objective truth. I think one of the things when the press tends to fail is when you have one person on one political side saying, "Oh, this other person, they're horrible and they're a liar and they're disgusting," and then the other side saying, "No, that other person is disgusting," and then you run a story that's saying, "Well, this guy said this and this other guy said that," and you just like, okay, we gave them equal weight, we're good. That doesn't really achieve anything. I don't think. I think the there should be an attempt to dig for the truth. And I think that I personally, I know this, some people were upset. I personally think it was a positive thing when Donald Trump would say something that was objectively a lie. Like if there would be video evidence that what he said was completely false, to be called out on it. Not to say, well, some people don't think what, some people think so, don't mince words, but this was a different thing because we've had presidents who've been dishonest, but never so frequently tell us something that we saw with our own eyes was different. I mean, when we have Republican politicians, some of his allies saying, that thing that happened on January 6th, it was just some patriotic tourists wanting to see the Capitol, and we got video of it. We were watching it in real time for a few hours, were my eyes lying to me? So the press has to try to get to the truth. The reality is that you got a lot of, really good reporters working really hard. Sometimes they're out there covering their beat, having to get, stories every day. They got limited time to do it. So those realities can be very difficult. But I think that my belief is that people, I think in this country they obviously, a lot of people dislike the press, but I think that people have really mixed up a lot of things. They've mixed up 24-hour TV news. They've even included social media as the press, when it's really just a bunch of people spouting off when they don't know what they're talking about. I think at the core of what the press is really reporters going out, covering, telling you stuff, going to places, talking to people, and getting information to you that you don't know. It's not somebody just like saying, oh, Kim Kardashian, just posted some new pictures of herself, and I'm going to write a little story about it because I'm going to get some clicks. That's not the press, really. I mean, not really, as far as what the press is there to achieve. The press is there because we don't need the press for that. We need the press to go out and dig for information and go out and talk to the people and hold our elected officials and others feet to the fire. And even if they're big business people who are corrupt and cheating people, expose that. This is what we need to do with the press for. And I think that in newspapers around this country, newspapers don't have the resources that they used to. They don't have the luxury necessarily to send, I talk to older reporters, we'll talk about, oh yeah, back in the day, and we used to fly us on a plane and we'd go and cover these things and cover these political events and everything. Things are obviously, the budgets are tighter than they used to be, and the resources are tighter. So it's affected the press. But my experience is that a lot of great, particularly young reporters at newspapers who are out there trying to get to the truth. And people need to know the difference between that and if you don't like some talking head on TV news who's just talking about some stuff that they barely know anything about, that's not the same as a reporter at a newspaper who's working hard, in some cases putting themselves in harm's way, putting themselves in danger. We have a tremendous reporter who was out in hospitals during the COVID crisis and putting herself in really her health at risk to get to stories to tell us about what people in our community were going through, and what hospitals were going through, and healthcare workers. And it's important information. And it really makes me mad when people like that who are so dedicated to the truth and work so hard and put themselves, it's almost like you come out of that almost with PTSD if you have to do that kind of reporting all the time. And they're working really hard. And in the mind of the public, those hardworking reporters get equated with some guy who shows up on one of the TV 24-hour news channels and just starts saying, some stuff that they don't really know anything about. And it's not the same thing. And people need to get clear. The last thing I want to say is I've been a reporter for most of my career, but right now I write opinion. I'm a columnist, so I write my opinion. And I think a lot of people get confused. And people sometimes will say to me, well, you're supposed to be an objective reporter and everything else. I'll say, well, my job is actually to express my opinion. I have to hopefully base it in reporting and it has to be based in fact, but it's my opinion. And so people get a lot of these things mixed up. And that's why I think they get so angry at the press, because they get confused about what the categories are.
Yeah, no, I think that was key, man. It's the meshing of the two and then they get frustrated when they, I hear you, man. That's definitely what it is. So yeah, man, could you please plug in where people can read some of your stuff, obviously, and then I'll put some information for your the book you have. We didn't talk about it, but I'd like to have you back on, and we can talk about all kinds of different things. Can you kind of put where people can reach you at?
Yeah, if they want to find me on social media, my Twitter handle is Gilgamesh 470 Gilgamesh, GILGAMESH 470, and I usually post my stories there. I my columns. I do 3 columns a week, and I also post our podcast, which we do once a week, which covers what's going on politically every week. So I think that's the best place. And obviously our premium site, expressnews.com site, you can find a lot of stuff there. So yeah, I really appreciate you having me on, and it was fun talking about all this.
All right. Thank you, Gilbert, for coming on. And if you don't mind, man, just stay for a minute after we sign out here, because I want to talk to you about some stuff. Cool, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.